The Tyranny of Taxation, a historical and economic reflection on the hypocrisy of modern income taxation. Few political issues stir as much indignation among working citizens as the idea of income taxation, the government's claim on the very wages earned through individual effort. For many Americans, the notion feels both unnatural and unjust. Why should labor itself be taxed when the founding generation once sustained the entire machinery of government without intruding into personal earnings? It is a paradox rooted in history, one that reflects the divergence between the moral and economic philosophy of the early republic and the fiscal machinery of the modern state. In this essay, we explore the hypocrisy inherent in sustaining an income tax when tariff-based revenue once funded the nation, examine the historical evolution from customs duties to direct taxation, and consider how a principled political leadership might liberate the working population from what many view as a form of fiscal tyranny. The origins of the American Fiscal Compact. When the 13 colonies declared independence from Britain, they inherited not only the idea of liberty but also the practical question of how to fund a government without violating that liberty. British colonial administration had relied heavily on tariffs and excise duties levied on imports and exports, taxes that targeted commerce, not labor. The anger that fueled the revolution was not merely over taxes themselves, but over their imposition without consent and oversight. The early United States consciously sought a system that reflected the principle of voluntary contribution, through consumption rather than compulsion through income seizure. Alexander Hamilton, in his report on public credit, 1790, emphasized tariffs as a stable source of revenue consistent with national sovereignty. Tariffs on imported goods served two purposes. They generated income for the federal treasury and protected emerging domestic industries from foreign competition. In this framework, taxes were transactional and voluntary. Citizens paid through their choices in the market, not through bureaucratic intrusion into their private earnings. For nearly a century, tariffs, excises, and land sales funded the federal government. The United States grew, built canals and railroads, won wars, and settled the frontier, all without an income tax. This period demonstrated that a nation could sustain robust growth and sovereignty without subjecting its citizens to direct surveillance of their income. The Civil War and the birth of the income tax. The rupture came with the Civil War. Faced with unprecedented wartime expenses, the Lincoln administration introduced the first federal income tax in 1861 as a temporary emergency measure. It was explicitly justified as a wartime expedient, a necessity born of national survival, not a permanent feature of government finance. The Revenue Act of 1861 imposed a modest tax on high incomes, but subsequent amendments made it progressive and far-reaching. When the war ended in 1865, the moral justification for the income tax evaporated. Yet, like so many bureaucratic measures conceived in crisis, it proved difficult to repeal in principle, even as it was dismantled in practice. By 1872, the tax had been allowed to expire, and the nation returned to its traditional reliance on tariffs and excises. The enduring argument for the income tax rested on a claim of fairness, that those with the greatest means should contribute proportionally more to the maintenance of the state. Yet this principle also set the stage for a gradual erosion of fiscal privacy and personal autonomy. A tax on income required the government to know, record, and verify each citizen's private finances, something unthinkable to the early republic's founders. The Gilded Age Compromise. Tariffs as national identity through the rest of the 19th century. The tariff system became not only an economic instrument but also a symbol of national identity. The tariff protected northern industry and indirectly funded southern and western infrastructure as both shield and sustenance, a way to maintain independence from foreign interests while avoiding the social discord that arises from direct taxation. The tariff debates of the late 1800s were intense. Protectionists saw tariffs as a modern extension of the revolution. As promise, taxation based on consumption and sovereignty rather than coercion. The idea that the federal government would tax wages directly was still seen as radical, almost European in its implications. The constitutional shift. The 16th Amendment. This equilibrium shattered in the early 20th century. The rise of industrial barons and vast corporate fortunes produced a new political climate, one that equated tariffs with privilege and sought new forms of scientific revenue collection. In 1913, the 16th Amendment empowered Congress to lay and collect taxes on incomes, from whatever source derived. The architects of this change insisted it would target only the wealthy and remain modest in scope. Early rates were indeed low. Most Americans paid nothing. But the constitutional amendment opened a Pandora's box. Once the principle was established that the government could levy direct taxes on personal income, there was no logical or legal limit to its expansion. By World War I, the top marginal rate had soared above 70%. The federal government had discovered a seemingly inexhaustible stream of revenue, one that no longer depended on international trade or industrial tariffs. The psychological shift was profound. The citizen now worked not solely for himself but partly for the state. The decline of tariffs and the growth of Leviathan throughout the 20th century. The income tax became the backbone of federal revenue. Tariffs, once the lifeblood of the Treasury, dwindled in relative importance as the world embraced free trade and multilateral economic institutions. The rationale for the income tax, wartime necessity, had long vanished, yet its permanence remained unquestioned. Here lies the hypocrisy. A tax designed for an exceptional crisis continues to burden every wage earner more than 8 decades after its purpose ended. The Civil War was over in 1865, yet the fiscal weapon forged to pay for it endures in peacetime, expanded into every corner of civilian life. Meanwhile, the argument that an advanced nation needs an income tax grows weaker in the face of historical and economic fact. The United States once flourished under tariff-based revenue. Indeed, the early republic achieved prosperity without any invasive taxation regime. Critics contend that tariffs distort markets, but this overlooks the reality that income taxes distort lives by discouraging work, punishing success, and eroding privacy. The moral and philosophical contradiction beyond economics lies a deeper philosophical issue: the moral justification of taxing labor itself. A tax on income is fundamentally different from a tariff or sales tax. Tariffs tax transactions between producers and consumers. Income taxes penetrate the individual's private sphere, his labor, his time, his effort. From a moral standpoint, taxing income implies that a person's labor does not fully belong to him. Each hour worked becomes a shared enterprise between citizen and state, with the government claiming first rights to its proceeds. Such a view runs contrary to the Lockean principle of self-ownership, the idea that property originates in labor and thus belongs solely to the individual who performs it. This philosophical dissonance lies at the heart of modern fiscal hypocrisy. A free people cannot genuinely claim to own their labor. When a portion of it is preemptively seized to sustain a bureaucratic superstructure that long ago ceased to serve its founding purpose. The economic case for returning to tariff and consumption-based revenue, while moral arguments carry emotional weight, economic reasoning also exposes the inefficiencies of income taxation. Modern economies function best when incentives align with productivity and innovation. Income taxes penalize these forces by reducing the rewards of work and investment. Tariffs and consumption-based taxes, by contrast, tie revenue generation to voluntary spending and trade. They allow individuals to control how much they contribute based on their consumption patterns. Moreover, tariffs naturally protect domestic employment and industry. They can be calibrated to encourage local production, reduce dependency on foreign supply chains, and channel revenue toward national infrastructure. Contrary to conventional wisdom, moderate tariffs historically coincided with periods of expansive growth, such as the post-Civil War boom and early 20th century industrialization. The political path toward fiscal liberation to imagine how a good president might liberate the population from the income tax as enduring tyranny requires both vision and discipline. The transition would not occur overnight. It would necessitate a phased rebalancing of revenue sources, regulatory reform, and diplomatic restructuring of global trade agreements. But the principle remains achievable. Such a president would begin by reaffirming a classical view of sovereignty, that the state exists to protect individual rights, not to subsume them. He or she would introduce a program with 3 pillars: tariff restoration, gradually reintroduce moderate, strategic tariffs on foreign goods that unfairly undercut domestic industries. These tariffs would be limited and targeted. ensuring they raise sufficient revenue while avoiding protectionist excess. Income tax reduction. Phase down income tax rates in tandem with tariff revenue growth, prioritizing relief for middle and working class citizens. A constitutional amendment or supermajority mandate could cap the percentage of personal income subject to federal taxation. Fiscal transparency and efficiency. Require that all new spending initiatives identify explicit tariff or consumption-based funding mechanisms, reducing the opaque borrowing that currently masks the true cost of government. Over time, such reforms could restore the founding-era balance between liberty and responsibility. A citizenry that funds its state through honorable commerce, not coerced contribution. A lesson from history. Prosperity without intrusion. History provides powerful proof of concept. Between 1790 and 1913, when tariffs dominated federal revenue, the United States transformed from a fragile union into the world's leading industrial and agricultural power. Despite periodic recessions, the economy expanded, wages rose, and personal savings flourished, all without an income tax. Critics argue that tariffs alone cannot sustain the complexity of a modern government. Yet this argument confuses necessity with ambition. The government of the Republic's early years maintained essential national defense, infrastructure, and law without exceeding its constitutional bounds. It was not the lack of money that changed this equation but the growth of federal appetite. The return to a tariff-based system would thus be less about revisiting the past and more about reclaiming balance, restraining a government that has grown beyond its natural proportions by tethering its funding mechanisms once again to commerce rather than compulsion. The path of a good president, leadership for a free citizenry. A good president, in the moral sense of the phrase, is not merely an adept administrator but a steward of liberty. Such a president would recognize that taxation is not a neutral instrument, but a reflection of the relationship between state and citizen. In dismantling or reforming the income tax, the executive's challenge would be to realign the government as moral economy with its founding philosophy, that individuals are ends, not means, and that the fruits of labor belong first to the laborer. By invoking both history and principle, such a leader could inspire a new generation of Americans to reclaim fiscal self-respect. This is not ideological fantasy. It is constitutional restoration. The founders' model worked because it respected the natural link between freedom and responsibility. A tariff and consumption-based tax system empowers citizens to choose their contributions through market participation, ending the structural hypocrisy of taxing the very labor that sustains the nation. Conclusion. Toward a free and honest fiscal republic, the income tax, conceived as a temporary war measure, has become a permanent chain on economic liberty. Its persistence represents a profound contradiction that in a nation born in rebellion against arbitrary taxation, the government now exercises powers far beyond those ever tolerated by the founders. Tariffs once funded this republic without violating the sanctity of individual earnings. The machinery of direct income taxation, by contrast, transforms the state from servant to silent partner in every paycheck. To free the working population from this system is not mere economic reform. It is an act of moral renewal, a return to the logic of liberty that defines the American experiment. The path forward lies not in endless redistributive tinkering, but in reclaiming the fiscal integrity that once distinguished the republic from the empires it rejected. A wise and courageous leader can remind the nation that freedom is not maintained by rhetoric but by structure, and that among all forms of tyranny, taxation without necessity remains the most insidious. It's called the fair tax, so what exactly is it? All of them, with a single national sales tax on new goods and services. Imagine a world with no more income tax forms, no more payroll deductions, and no more IRS as we know it. Instead, you'd pay your taxes when you buy something new. Every single dollar you earn is yours. This means everyone, including tourists and even those operating in the underground economy, contributes when they make purchases. That's a super important question, and the fair tax has a built-in solution called the prebate. This prebate is designed to refund the taxes paid on essential spending up to the poverty level. So for families living at or below the poverty line, the system effectively becomes tax-free on necessities. They get the money first to cover the tax on their basic needs. You decide when and how you pay your taxes through your spending choices. Proponents believe this could boost the economy, bring jobs back to the country, and make tax evasion much, much harder. Questions about the exact rate, how to handle business-to-business transactions, and the transition from our current system are all part of the conversation. Could the fair tax be the key to a better financial future? And if you enjoyed this little deep dive,
Please tell me what you think and how you feel about this issue. Analyze it, brainstorm it, debate it, and if you like it, please share it. Thank you for watching. I truly and highly appreciate you, and God bless you.